Alright, so let's take a look at the difference between these let and const variable. So let's say I want to modify the course. Alright, so the course at the top is JavaScript, but when it comes here, right, so I can say course equal to Python. Alright, so let's see the result, the output of this. Okay, so when we display this, so it says what I love Python, but at the top you can see it says what I love JavaScript. So what are we what does this even mean? All right, so it means that with the let variable we can modify our value. We can reassign our value, we can change our value into something completely different from our initial value. Alright, so the let variable allows us to assign new value to that variable. Alright, so we can change our value to something different. We can change it to a different type of data completely, not just a string data type. Alright, so if we want to use a number data type or an object or an array, we can change it completely. So the let variable allows us to change our data, right, into something completely different from the previous one. But let's try that for the const variable. So I'll call up the age and I'll give it a value of 24. All right, so let's say 35. All right, so the user can only get added in terms of age but not reduced. So let's say age is 35. And then when we check that out, we can see we have what an error. So assignment to constant variable. So what this means is that we cannot modify a const value once it has been declared. Alright, so once you declare a const variable, you cannot reassign it. Alright, so that's the difference between the let variable and the const variable. Alright, let variable allows us to reassign our value. Const variable does not. Alright, so we must get rid of this, right, in order for that error to be cleared out. So whenever you're making use of the const variable, once you assign a value to it, you cannot change it. Okay, it's just constant. Just like your pi, right? Pi is 22/7, so it has always been a constant value. So constant, the const value is the const keyword rather is a constant value. So whenever you assign a value to that, you cannot change it. So that's just a little bit of intro on the variable. Alright, what variable is and how we can make use of it to assign a value to it. Okay, so like we said on the var, we cannot use that in the modern JavaScript. So yeah, we talked about identifiers. Alright, so identifiers are what? Names given to variables. Alright, apart from variables, we can also use it in functions, we can also use it in classes. Okay, so how do we name our identifiers? What are the rules, all right, when to follow when naming your identifiers? Okay, so for example, I'm trying to use let's say date of birth. All right, so let's say date of birth, let date of birth. All right, so when naming your variable, there should not be space in between your identifier name. All right, no space in between your identifier name. So you cannot also use an hyphen. So an hyphen is not accepted in JavaScript. So in order to bridge that, you can use an underscore. All right, you can make use of an underscore. All right, when naming your identifier. Or you can also use the camel case method. So there is the camel case method that is also acceptable, all right, when naming your identifier. So your identifier name can start with a $sign. All right, so that's also an acceptable identifier. You cannot use a number to start your identifier, but you can use a number in between or at the end of your variable. All right, it doesn't matter. All right, you can add a number in between or after, all right, your identifier name. Okay, so those are just the rules. You can use an underscore to start your identifier name. So those are just the rules to note when naming your identifiers. So this applies to variables, functions, and your classes. All right, so your variables identifiers, or your identifiers basically, are also case sensitive. All right, so they are all case sensitive. So that means your capital, your let's change this, your capital C is different from your small c. So you can see that we have an error here, right? So it says what, could not find named cause. All right, so do you mean cause? So that means this cause is quite different from this. Okay, so we must always be cautious when naming our identifier. Try to follow up these rules, and we won't have any sort of syntax errors when developing or making our statement for execution. Okay, so JavaScript has different data types that we can use to actually assign values. All right, so JavaScript allows us to store values using different data formats, or simply data types. All right, so these data types are categorized into two main types. Okay, so we have the primitive data types and the complex data types. So we are just going to run through all of this to understand how to make use of it. So the first one we have is the string data types. All right, so the string data types has different formats in declaring your string data type, so we're going to talk about that in a bit. All right, so we also have the number data type, so we can also represent data in form of numbers. We have the Boolean data types. All right, so Boolean data types are of two types. All right, we have the true or the false. Okay, so we're also going to talk about that. We have the undefined. That means your variable or your variable identifier has no value. All right, so when you have undefined, it means that particular identifier has not been assigned a value. So you also have a null value, which is an empty value. All right, so we have the complex data type, which consists of the objects, also consists of the array. So object allows us to group data using key value pairs. All right, so arrays consist of items that are stored in an index location, and we can access those items using that index number. All right, so we also have the functions that allows us to define a block of codes that performs a particular task. Okay, so we also have the dates data type. All right, so we are going to be taking all of these one after the other. All right, so let's get started with the string data type.